Firebase so that I can be cautious? How many of you know Firebase? Okay, 1%, 2%, 3. Okay, I think 4. Perfect. So I think 5. Yeah. Then I think I need to give an intro about Firebase. Before that, myself, I am Varun, and I run a company called HelloNext. So we do like a feedback management system. And apart from that, I'm also a GDG for Firebase. So basically, in case of any we help people with the Firebase technology itself. So that's what I represent today. And so the major agenda is what and why and when and how to do it. So that is the gist of it. So what is Cloud Function? So what is Firebase? Maybe someone from the crowd, someone who knows Firebase. What is Firebase? Anyone who raised the hands? Yeah, it's a backend as a service, right? Like it is more like you are a mobile developer or you're a web developer and you don't want to worry about building apps with backend logic. You can go with Firebase. So that is I know it's confusing, but that is kind of the idea of it. So how many of you are mobile developers here? One. How many of you are web developers? Web developers, so front end or back end? So front end, like, so how do you build, your web applications? So you work with the backend developer, right? And they give you APIs and everything. What if there is a service that provides you these APIs, instead of you relying on another person? So that is Firebase for you. So it comes with APIs, it comes with SDKs for you to build mobile apps without worrying about your backend, your deployment, your anything outside your scope of work. So that's what Firebase does. It's a backend as a service. And what is Cloud Functions? So Firebase has a lot of modules. Like it has a database, like a NoSQL database, which is the Firebase Firestore, and it has authentication. So if you want to build an app with social logins, these are just clicks away. Like, and you just configure it, and then you call the functions, the SDK functions or the API functions, and then the Firebase will do the rest for you. Right? It has real-time database. Like if you're building a game and you want to come like for example Ludo game, right? So when you click on it, everyone else in the game gets the update instantly. So there is a real-time database for that, and it's all bunch of API calls to achieve it. Nothing fancy, nothing complex, etc. And in which Firebase functions are specific modules, where when I say backend as service, it cannot give you everything that the backend service can do, right? Like it cannot do custom logics. It can give you APIs to play with data. It can give you APIs to play with authentication. But there are some points, some parts of the application which needs custom touch. Like you need to build your own things. So that's where Cloud Functions comes into the picture. So Cloud Functions are very similar to the Lambda functions. How many of you know Lambda functions? Serverless and all those things. So that is basically Firebase serverless function. Cloud Function is basically Firebase. The serverless functions provided by Firebase. Right? It is a function as a service. So you build a logic, you push it, and then it runs on the infrastructure. You don't have to do any deployments or just like that. And yeah, as I said, it's a piece of code. There is no, you don't have to set up a server. You don't have to set up a web server. You're buying an instance in GCP. Nothing you have to do. You just need to deploy it from a CLI. And it's all stateless in nature. So when I say stateless, which means these piece of codes does not, hold any data at any given point of time. It's more like a pipeline. You send some information, you send 2 parameters. It throws out one more output. That's all it does. It's a stateless machine. So if you're building something to compute something, you can go with functions. So you give A and B, and it does something, and then generates C. So that's all it does. It will not hold any values of A or B. So that's what a serverless function in general, and executed on a trigger. So this is one of the important points. You have a GCP server, right? And if you have a web server, a PHP server, or a Ruby server, a Python server, you need to keep it running 24/7 in order to serve your customers. So Cloud Functions are not like that. It has a pull-off period. So if it is not triggered on a regular basis, it goes to a sleep and invoked when there is a trigger. So there is a bunch of triggers that is provided by Firebase. We'll get into it deeper later. But generally, Firebase, serverless functions work on a trigger. It can be anything. It depends on the platform that you're going with. There are multiple triggers. And finally, it scales automatically. So this is a very common concept, right? Like for example, you are building an application for, say, e-commerce, right? So generally, the trend is that people use the site on the, in the mornings rather than the evenings. So why do you need to run instance all 24 hours when your demand is only, in the mornings? So, with functions or with any serverless function, that is something that, it's very useful and handy for you, right? It runs, it executes whenever you want. Sometimes, you run an offer and you know that, when you run this offer, you're going to increase your, I'm getting an audio. Yeah. So when you run an offer, your traffic is going to spike up at that instant, like one or two days. Why do you need to scale up your server for that time? So this scales automatically and then goes back to the old state automatically. That's how functions work. So every time you trigger it, there's one function that's executed, and then so if in a month you run one execution, you will be charged for one execution. If you run million execution, you will be charged for million execution. Depends on what you're doing. Like spikes are handled automatically. So that's the major advantage with function, serverless function. And Firebase works on Google Cloud's infrastructure. So the GCP's in Google Cloud's infrastructure. So they have something called Google Cloud Functions. So Firebase is an iterative version of it. And also it supports JavaScript. So currently we Firebase is supported JavaScript, but Google Cloud Function has a different things. And Firebase Cloud Function works closely with the Firebase modules like authentication, Firestore, and all those things. So this is the deployment cycle, development or deployment cycle. You write the code, you push it, you monitor. Simple as that. So when I say the middle part, deploy, it's nothing but you Firebase deploy. That's all. The rest of the things like creating an instance, allocating your memory and everything is handled by Firebase itself. And you don't have to regularly monitor it as well because they have their own scaling mechanisms to perform it. So this is very important because whenever we do software application for the web, there is a lot of hustle, majorly for developers in order to deploy this instance, right? And moreover, when you are building something for yourself, building a self, indie kind of an app where you don't have resources or you don't have people to have a DevOps life cycle, this is pretty good to go, right? You just write, you deploy. Everything is taken care of. So that's kind of the leverage that serverless functions or Firebase functions are giving us. And so these are the triggers that are available. So HTTP trigger is nothing but you get whenever you publish a Firebase function, you get an HTTP endpoint which can be called by your mobile app or anything like that. So this is pretty common in developing APIs. Like you have a mobile app and you don't want to build a separate server. You don't want to publish a server. You can create a bunch of HTTP endpoints and then use it for your APIs. Use it as your mobile endpoint backend. And that's something called the cloud function. It's actually Firestore trigger. I just mentioned it function. So cloud Firestore is nothing but, as I said, a database, a NoSQL database. So whenever the node is created in the specific database, you can reference which part of the database the trigger going to work on. So whenever the node created, it pushes, it executes a function. So for example, if you want to, index your data, whenever the data is created, you can write a function and then connect it to a specific node. Similarly, real-time database, as I said, that is also one mode of database, which is a JSON structure. So whenever the path is created, like for example, whenever you build a game and then whenever the game is completed, you want to send a push notification. So you can listen to that specific element in the database and then push notification. Authentication trigger, whenever user is created, whenever user is deleted, You can send a notification like, onboarding email or offboarding email. And cloud storage is nothing but a file storage, something like S3 or Google Cloud Storage. So where you drop in files, like, you have an app which will allow you to upload profile pictures. And whenever you upload a profile picture, you need to resize it so that, in different size it is visible. You can listen to those files in cloud function, in cloud storage, and then you can take it and resize it and upload it. So functions works on top of it. So you don't have to work, you don't have to set a separate, uploader and all those things. So you just need to listen to that file and then reduce it. So PubSub is nothing but sockets where you publish an event and all the subscribers to the event gets a trigger, right? So Cloud Functions could be one of the trigger where you publish something from external servers as well, and then you can listen to it. And there's a test lab. Like for example, whenever the test case passes, so these are analytics. These two are more on the monitoring part of the Firebase. So majorly for developers, these are the analytics. There's also a scheduler where you can configure functions to run on every given period of time, like a minute or 5 minute ones, every day. Like for example, if you want to send a customer report, daily customer report, you can just set up a trigger that will run on a daily basis and then send it to the team. So that is about the triggers and why and when. So now we know that what Firebase can do, right? Like what functions can do. But there's a question of why to do it and when to do it, right? Because you cannot put functions on any use case. There is some limitation and there are a lot of advantages. So this will probably give you a clarity on why to use Firebase and when to use functions. As I said, you have a mobile app and you want to do something outside of your mobile app, right? Like for example, we take Flipkart for the matter. So whenever we view the user, view the products, but you want to create an ML or some sort of mechanism. Whenever someone likes a product, you need to collect the data and then do some massaging or do some research on the data. You can go with Cloud Functions where that will not execute on your device. And similarly, for example, when you build a game, send an email from your data, you don't have to rely on the browser. Like you cannot do some things in the browser. And also like open endpoints for integrations. Like you have a Firebase-based app, either a web app or mobile app. So how do you allow other applications to interact with your application? So you need to open up webhooks. You need to open up endpoints, integrations. So like for example, we built Zapier integration for our app, with functions so that it can allow data coming from and then going to Zapier with the functions. And processing, I was giving a classic example, right? You upload an image, you need to resize it, right? So resizing the image, cannot be done on a browser. If you're building a web app and you're using Firebase as your backend, so you need a powerful system or powerful infrastructure to do this. So that's where Cloud Function comes into picture. And push notifications, right? Like you want to send a push notification from your application whenever there's a new friend request for your app or there's an event in your app, you need to send push notifications. So those kind of scenarios, you can go with functions. So there are other scenarios as well, like processing of payments. Like you need a webhook whenever there's a payment successful. You need to send your you need to keep your application aware that there is a payment process or scheduled emails. Like for that, I was saying, right? You have a scheduler where you can push data to push data or process something on a regular basis. You can use Cloud Functions. There are n number of scenarios. So these are very common things that I listed out and why to use. So there are different set of tools to perform the same things, but why to go with Cloud Function, right? So common things are reduce the complexity of your app. For example, if you're doing 10 operations in your mobile app, right, and out of that 8 are kind of complex and not necessarily have to be done real time, you can push off to Cloud Functions, right? For example, you want to index the data, or you want to denormalize the data, or you want to check if it is spam or not. You build a mobile social network, and you want to check if the content is spam or not. What do you have to do with the device? You can push it off to Cloud Function, and then do it and then report it, something like that. So complex operations can be offloaded to Firebase Cloud Functions, so that your client is thin and much flexible and also fast. And some operations needs server functions, right? So for those, in order to set a separate server, you can go with functions so that you pay for only what you use. I have a one of my friend used to run a mobile app where they need very small set of operations to be done on a server. So what they did is that they built a bunch of functions for that, Firebase functions, and then the billing for them reduced a lot because they don't need a powerful instance. They need a powerful instance. At the same time, they don't use it often. So in order, if you go with the GCP or something like that, you need to keep it running every time so that it is available when it is needed. When they moved to functions, it was very good for them because they don't have to pay for all the times that is not running, right? So that's where we go with if you want a server infrastructure and if your load is very small and if your load is unreliable, go with cloud functions because that will save you a lot of money. And as I said, webhooks, right? Like, that is one common thing people were missing before Firebase Cloud Functions were launched. Because they built an app, and the app was not able to do anything with the external applications or external data. So when functions launched, they were opening a lot of webhooks and integrations for their application with help of functions. So that is kind of why to use functions and when to use functions. So finally, the how, right? So how do we do that? We have been, seeing, I was telling you even how easy it is to do it and why, what all you can achieve with it. But actually, how do we do that? So probably I'll do a small live session so that you get to know what exactly it is and how to do it, in a kind of a live environment. Yeah. So probably I'll just I'm visible in that. Is it fine? Okay. So I'll probably create, yeah, the screen is visible. Yeah. So let me create a new folder. This is my terminal. So I'm just creating a new folder. Functions. Okay. And here I'm going to functions. Okay. I'm going to create a new Firebase project. So we have a CLI command for it. So there's something called Firebase tools that we need to install. So I just installed it already. I'll show you. So this is the Firebase tool. That is a CLI that we need to install. Once you install, we get this CLI command called Firebase. So that comes with a lot of functions that a lot of operations. Functions, you might not get confused. So this comes with a lot of operations that you can manage your Firebase project. So I'm going to create a new project. So Firebase init. So it'll ask me what are the operations that we need to, we need in our Firebase project. Like it asks whether we need a real-time database. So we don't need real-time database, but we need a Firestore, which is the cloud function, NoSQL database I was talking about. And we need functions, and we don't need hosting. We need emulators. So emulators are nothing but, in order to simulate your function, Firebase entire project, you can set up simulators so that you can test everything locally and then push it to your production. And other than that, I think nothing else. So I'll just go with, I'm going to create a new project. I'll just put GDG Firebase demo 123. I'll just do the same. Okay, it'll take some time. Yeah, now I got the Firebase project. I think it looks like you haven't used. Yeah. So now I need to set up. I'll just upgrade my plan. I think that is because it will not allow us to use functions without the plan. So to reduce the errors, I'm just updating it. And Firestore, I'll create a small, I'll just set up the database. So these are things that you do whenever you set up a new project. So I'm just simulating all those things. Yeah, let me open it in the code as well, the VS code. I think nothing is there. So let me initialize it again. Functions, Firestore, emulators, system project. Go to, yeah, this is the one that we selected. We like to go with Firestore. So I'm just setting up the basic things like what what is the name of the Firestore rules that we need to go, the indexes. This will take some time. Meanwhile, we'll see if yeah our database is ready, and let's go and then check the functions. Currently, we'll not have any function. So this is where you manage your functions. After you push it, you know, this is where you basically monitor. Like you can see the logs as well here. Like whenever whenever it throws an error or you want to monitor set of the actions that it goes in, so you can find it here. So I'll go. Yeah, I'm coming back to the setup process. So I'm going to go with JavaScript. No, it's not going to. Yeah, install the dependencies. Yeah, for emulators, I'm going to go with authentication functions first. Yeah, this is just asking for codes. Yeah, now we got it. So once you initialize it, let me close it a bit. Yeah, once you initialize it, you get these files, and functions folder is where you have all your files, all your functions, right? So for example, if you see there's a file default, created by default, which is called index.js, and it comes with the default functions. So let me uncomment it. Yeah. So basically, every time you you want to create a new function, you can write it anywhere, but finally you need to import it and then export it in the index function, index file, index.js, because this is the kind of the entry point, and your Firebase when you deploy it, it will look for the exported functions here, and then it will be registering it in the portal. Right? So currently they already have a function called exports.hello-world, right? So it is actually a function of HTTP trigger. So if you see it's HTTPS. So there are triggers like, let me write a new function for listening to our data in Firestore, right? So what I did is that I created a new function called data listener, which is a Firestore cloud function. So which is listened to a specific document under the users collection. So the first one before the slash is a collection. Under the users collection, any document that is created. So instead of specifying a document ID, I'm just encapsulating with the curly braces so that it listens to any. It's kind of a wildcard, so it listens to anything that comes under the user ID. So which means that any document that I create gets triggers this function, and this is a on create. So you similarly you have on edit, on delete, sorry, on delete, on update, and on write, right? So we create, and this will give us a snapshot of the currently created data, from which we extract the data with the dot data function. So what I'm doing is I'm just printing the new data that is created. So here you can do anything like sending to us external service, or sending an email, push notification, anything like that, right? So that is kind of a base of boilerplate of function. So now let's test it. So there is something called emulator, right? So I'll just run the emulator. I think it's already running. Let me kill the existing emulator. And now let me run the simulators. Yeah, 88 is running. I think the UI is starting. 1 second. Yeah, now we can see it. So this is kind of the emulator that comes as a local development kit. So where you can see the Firestore and logs of the functions here. So if you see, there is a function got created for HTTP, right? And similarly, the Firestore function also is initialized. So what happens is that it will listen to a specific, collection called users. So anytime you create a document under the users, that function gets triggered. So let me create a small sample document, and I'm creating a document ID. That is a randomly created document ID, and I'll just put name as Varun and my email. Yeah, so when I create this, you can see that the log is the new data created function gets triggered, right? So that is how you can basically listen to different events, or you can register events across Firebase modules and then create it. So now let's see that now that we know that it is working. So let's see how to deploy it. So all you have to do is that let me close the emulator, Firebase deploy. So it'll register all the functions. It'll check all the routes. This will take a bit, because it needs to compile the code, push it to the functions, and then deploy it. So now it's kind of uploading it. So once it is getting deployed, we can actually see it here. I think it's yet to get deployed. I think there's some issue. That is weird. Okay, I think there's some issue going on, so I'm not able to deploy it. But I'll show you a similar example that I have. Yeah. So once you deploy it, you get the functions. I think it's all done. Yeah, so you get the functions like this, and it will show what type of trigger these are. Like for example, this is a Firestore trigger that is looking for acknowledges and the corresponding document ID, and there are some HTTP triggers as well. So basically, you get all these triggers, and similarly, you can see the logs of these each functions here. So you get all the logs of what is happening in, so that whenever you want to debug it, you can use it for debugging as well, and the usage and everything. So that is kind of how you build, you write your function, you deploy it, and then you monitor. So and in case if you want to bridge it with other items as well, so you can set up pops up triggers. So for example, some event in your Google Cloud, and you want to trigger it here, you can use pops up. And if you want to monitor for any analytics event, you can use the analytics trigger as well. If you want to schedule it, you have a scheduler that can run on a given interval and then deploy. So that is Firebase function for you, in a short session. Probably we can do a deeper session as well, like with specific scenarios, like how do you index data in your search database from Firebase database, or how do you set up Stripe payments, or how do you process images in functions, something like that as well. So meanwhile, if you have any doubts, probably we can have a open discussion about it. And we have some other alternatives to functions, like it's not only Firebase that is providing serverless functions. So there is also Google Cloud Functions. So if you don't want JavaScript and you want to write something in Go, or you want to write in Python or something like that, you can go with Google Cloud Functions. So that supports like Go, Python, Google, and all those things. There is also Supabase functions. So Supabase is a similar, a tool like Firebase, but on if you want to self-host it, you can go with Supabase as well. It also has something called the Supabase functions that some works more like cloud functions, right? And there's also Lambda functions, typically like AWS, serverless functions to monitor any of the events in AWS, and can also be extended to, self custom operations as well. And that's also called Next.js, where you can deploy it with Vercel to build APIs. So currently, I use functions, Firebase Cloud Functions, majorly for when an app is tightly tied to functions, Firebase, and I use Next.js whenever I want a standalone server. So that is pretty much about the alternatives. And in case if you have any open, if you have any questions, we can have a discussion, or we can wrap it up for the next speaker. Any questions? No? Yeah.
What do you think will happen to Firebase when Web 3.0 takes over?
Web 3.2, I mean 3.0 takes over. No, I think it's more like what happens to our telephone lines when internet came in, right? So internet lines are internet lines we still use. I mean, telephone lines are still telephone lines. We still use it. It's not getting impacted. It has its own it owns path, and then it keeps running. So something like television as well. So even if we get the internet based television, we still have Tata Sky. We still have Apple TV and stuff like that. It's kind of a similar run.
So let's say there's not much growth that you expect in Firebase for the future.
No, there will always be growth, right? Like, see, it's been 20 years, we still use the internet, and that's going to be the future as well, I guess.
But with better technology,
Yeah, with better technology, because I think 4 years back we didn't have cloud features. 5 years back we didn't have Firestore. So that also getting improved, right? Like maybe who knows, we might have A-based mobile development itself in Firestore. You might have known Copilot, right? GitHub Copilot. So maybe it is getting improved, and then you tell there is something called DALI. I think Karan you have written there. So where you describe an image, you describe something and then it generates an image. So maybe Firebase comes up with like you describe an app and then it builds the app for you. You don't know. So there's always scope for exploration. I think that answers your question. So anyway, anything else? Cool. I think then I'll give it off to Naveen. So probably we'll take up for the next session. Yeah, Naveen. Don't be shocked. You want me to talk for some more time? Thanks, guys. I think that I'll be around for in case you have anything about Firebase or anything else as well. We can definitely.
Hi, good afternoon to one and all. Myself, Rajesh, software engineer. I works for Cognizant. So I predominantly works on the web technologies like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, and the JavaScript frameworks. So my first JavaScript framework is like EXT.js, and then I worked on Backbone.js, Angular 1.x, and Angular 2, and then the latest versions of Angular, and I worked on React, Vue.js, and on the backend part I worked on Node.js and the frameworks of Node.js like Express, Feather.js, React Remix, and then recently Next.js. So I predominantly works on the web technologies. So if you see, like the web technology has evolved a lot in the past 1 decade. Like for the past 7 to 8 years, the web technology has used drastically. So earlier, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript was seen as only to create a website. Like JavaScript was used as a client-side scripting language, and it was mainly used for the validation purpose. Now the JavaScript is like used in almost all the domains, like in front end, the front end frameworks like Angular, React, and in the back end we are using JavaScript with the help of Node.js and Deno. And then even in machine learning, we are using JavaScript with TensorFlow.js. So JavaScript was widely used across all the multiple domains. So if you see in the early days, like the web page or web application was created with HTML tables. So the layout will be structure will be created with HTML tables. So and then we moved to like develop with divs, like we used to develop with the div tags itself, and then like we moved to Bootstrap, and then like the schematic tags was introduced like header, section, footer, aside, article kind of thing, and then the latest addition like Flexbox, Grid, and then now recently the container queries. It is similar to media queries. So whereas the media queries works for the entire viewport, whereas the container queries can work for the particular parent container. So likewise, the web has evolved a lot. So every year, like in web, we are getting new features. So it's all because of the community. So for the web, we have the huge community like few people. So the web each and every year, like not only Google, like all the web domains has started introducing the new features rollout. So in today's session, we are going to see like what are the some of the, there are many features introduced, but we are going to see some of the major features so which is supported across widely in all the browsers. So let's start. We'll start. So as I said, myself Rajesh, I work for Cognizant. So in today's session, we are going to see like what is the use of dialogue element, like a model, alert or pop-up, which we used to create by ourselves. Like we used to create our own development, and we used to give set index, and we used to give overlay, everything we need to take care. So instead of that, now web app offers the native element called dialog. So again, it supports the accessibility parts as well. And then we have something called daytime local. Yeah, the daytime local was introduced earlier, but right now it was supported across all the browsers. And then we have something called image lazy loading. So we can lazy load the image natively. So it increases the performance of the web page very rapidly. For example, let's say, so if you have an image, 100 images in a web page, if it is taking 2000 milliseconds to load the data, so if we apply lazy loading, even it can load in 200 milliseconds. So that much performance we can able to achieve with the image lazy loading. And then we have something called accent color. So normally for the input elements like radio and checkbox, progress bar. So we will have the native color for the whichever it depends upon the browser. So we will have the default color. So instead of that, if I want to override that color, it is like we need to write our CSS manually. But whereas with the help of accent property, so we could able to set the colors based on our theme, your company theme or logo theme, whatever you want to set, we can able to set the colors for this accent color. And we have something called cascade layer. So in CSS, we have something called specificity. to control which class overrides another class or ID overtakes over that. So here the cascade layer plays an important role over that specificity. And then we have something called as selector to select a parent based on the children. And then we have something called container queries. And in JavaScript, we have something called structure cloning, array at, and private properties inside a class, private properties, private method, and top level of it. If you see like the first few elements are related to HTML elements like dialog element, data and local, image lazy loading, accent, it are the HTML elements. And then the CSS properties, we have accent color, cascade layer, as selector, and then finally we have some of the JavaScript APIs. So apart from this, there are other JavaScript APIs also like media session, eyedropper API, page transition API as well. So as I said, so dialogs, the models with accessibility and usability built in. So it supports, so in 2021, it is not supported across all the browsers, but in 2022, it supports across all the browsers. Maybe at the end of the session, I will go through a running example of all these programs. As I said, the dialog HTML element represents a dialog box or other interactive components, such as it can be a dismissible alert, inspector, sub window, or even we can able to open a new form on the model pop-up. So we have something called datetime local. So the datetime local input allows the user to easily enter both a date and time, which includes him. So we have some separate input element called date. We have a separate input element called time. So whereas this datetime local allows us to enter a date and time. Also, it we can use the other validated attributes like min-max. Also, we can able to set for the input elements. So again, it is supported across all the browsers. So I can able to set the actual default value, and I can able to set the minimum and maximum values for it. So it supports like in native, in mobile view, it supports, in web it supports. So it takes care of the accessibility as well. So as I said, so another important introduction in this HTML is image lazy loading through the attribute called loading. So the browser level support for lazy loading image is now supported on web without the need to write a custom lazy loading uses a separate JavaScript library. So we have earlier we used to include a separate JavaScript library to achieve this lazy loading. So whereas now with the HTML attribute, so we can include an attribute called loading, and we can able to assign the value called lazy. So by default, your browser itself supports the native lazy loading. So lazy loading reduces the page weight, allows for a quicker page load, and also it conserves the bandwidth by delivering the content to user only if it is requested. So we can able to use this loading attribute for the image element and the iframe elements. So what about like audio and video? So again, it is a media element. Already for audio and video elements, we have a property called preload. So whether we can decide like whether it has to be loaded only on demand or when the web page loads itself. For that we have this lazy loading native loading attribute supports for the image tag and the iframe. So like how it works is like what if, for example, you have 100 images in your web page. Only first 10 images are visible in your web page. So only those first 10 images will get loaded. So when you scroll to the bottom, so wherever you are reaching, so from that point it is going to fetch the data from the server. So then accent color, customizable theme for base UI for the form controls. So the accent color property is applicable for the 4 input elements. Like one is for the input type equals checkbox, radio, and input type equals range, and for the progress bar. So this is the default state. For example, if you have any input element with radio, checkbox, progress, and range. So this is the default browser behavior in Chrome. For example, if I'm going to set this color, if I'm going to apply for root, it is going to be apply for all the input elements. But if you want to specifically apply to checkbox or radio button, we can able to individually select those elements, and we can able to apply the style for the specific element also. If you're going to specify root, it is going to apply for all the 4 types of these elements. Okay. And one more important feature in CSS, the cascade layer, user control CSS layer precedence. Okay. So as I said, so for the CSS, which class overrides another class, or element overrides, or ID overrides. So it is decided by the concept called specificity in CSS, right? Okay. Let's take example. For example, assume that I have a div element which is having the class card, and inside it I have a paragraph which is having the ID greet. Now if I write this style, like for paragraph, I'm giving the color red, and card P I have given color green. So in which color this hello text is going to render now? Yeah, it is green because of it has higher precedence specificity. In case if I want to render with red color, so under this scenario, what we do normally? So we used to specify important. So that means it overwrites this layer, right? Okay. Okay, so it is going to display in green color. Now, so if I go to another level, for example, paragraph, card paragraph, and then dot card slash greet. So now in which color it is going to display? Yeah, it is going to be blue because the ID has higher precedence than the class. Okay. Now, so if you take this example, now all this layer I have wrapped under a name called layer at layer, and you are going to provide a name for your layer. So whatever we are going to write, it is called it as rule. Okay. So we can be able to provide a user defined name for our layer. So in this case, for example, for the paragraph I have given super, and then for the card element which is ID I have given classic, and card with types element I have given premium. So it depends upon the order which you are writing this layer. So in this example, even though the classic has that higher precedence dot grid, so it doesn't matter. So whichever the order you are going to write the cascade layer, it is going to overtake. So here the CSS specificity, everything is overridden by your cascade layer. Okay. So now in this case, since I have written that premium as the last one, so it was displayed with that green color. So it is depends upon the order which you are writing this layer. And if you want to control, think that I want to load the classic first and I want to load the super next, we can able to control the order of that layer by specifying at layer and whichever want to overlay the first one. For example, now it is going to take classic as the first one, premium is going to override the classic, and super it is going to override the premium. So like whatever the style which I have given in super, it is going to take the highest precedent and it is going to display in the red color. Okay. Any doubt so far? So if we have a layer like this, for example, we can normally we used to, for example, when we work on Angular React, we used to import the layers, right? Import the files. So what we can do is we can just specify the name for your layers. Like for example, here for library one, I'm just specifying layer, libraries, layer, base, layer components, and whichever order you want to specify. For example, the first I want to load the library style, and then I want to load the base styles, then layout, and finally component. So that means the component is going to take the higher precedence. So when it will override is when it has the same property. If it is having a different property, whatever the order it is going to take, it is going to take that particular style properties. Okay. So another important addition is like as property. Even though it is not supported in all the process, but it is expected to support in near future. So the CSS selector that enables the user to select an element based on the parent children. So based on the children, I want to select a parent. So in this case, for example, so we have a figure element and fig caption, right? So normally if I want, this fig caption is an optional one. It is not a mandate inside a figure, but I want to select a figure which has a fig caption. So I can specify figure pseudo class of as, if it is as figure caption. So then for that, whatever the style we are going to write, it is going to be applied for the figure element. And then normally we used to wrap the image inside a figure tag. If this figure has that image tag, then this particular style is going to be applied to the parent element. So normally in CSS, based on the parent, we used to select a style to the child. So now with the help of this as pseudo selector, we can be able to select a parent based on the child. So another important addition is container queries. It is a component-based responsive styling that acts as parent size, state as type. So as I said earlier, so we are aware of media queries. So to handle the responsiveness of your web page. So how the media queries works is based on the entire viewport of your web page. So like for example, if the minimum width is like 400 pixel, maximum is 600 pixel, or the breakpoints normally which you use to specify, it applicable for the entire viewport. But for the specific container, so based on the specific container size, I want to change the style of my child inside the container. We can make use of the media queries, the container queries. So what we can do is, for the container, for example, the parent container, I'm going to specify the container type, inline, size, and the container name. Again, it is a user-defined name which we can set it for the container name. And then for the date is present inside the container. So, for example, the class which is having the day is a container, and date is a present inside the day container. For the date, I'm going to specify display block, and then for the date number, I'm going to specify the size. So this particular style is applicable only for the inside a parent if it is having a max width of 200 pixels. So for example, this is the layout, the day, and inside that you have the date for it. So whenever the size of the image changes, so automatically actually it has to be. So I attached a video for this, but the video is not playing like this. Normally what happens is, so when you stretch or enlarge the web page, automatically based on the size of the parent container, the content inside that date, the date will get made responsive. Okay. So normally in JavaScript, if you want to deep clone an object, so every day in day-to-day development, we used to do the deep cloning of an object, right? So normally to deep clone the object, we use this ACI to, like, first we will convert that object to string and then we will convert to JSON that path, or else like we will use a library called Lodash to deep clone, right? So I hope you're aware of like what's the difference between shallow copy and deep copy, right? So normally we use like destructuring, we can use our object.assign or jQuery's object.extend to make a shallow copy. But deep copy, like we need to make use of the external library, or we need to make it code right for it. So now in JavaScript, they introduced a new method called structured clone, so which is used to make a deep cloning of an object. So now we have a built-in method called structured clone to deep clone the object. If example, in this example, I have the object called person, I want to create a deep clone of it. So simply I can pass this object to the method called structured clone. So it is going to create a new clone object of it, including the nested object. Whereas if you use destructuring, it will do the cloning only for the first level. It will not do the cloning for the nested object. So that's the difference between shallow copy and deep copy. In shallow copy, only for the first level, it is going to make a copy of it. Whereas for the nested object, it is not going to make a copy. Whereas the deep clone, it is going to make create another copy for the nested objects as well. Okay. So and then like other important additions in JavaScript, like again it is recently supported by the ECMAScript. It has reached the stage 4. So that means we have something called top level await. So I hope you all aware of like async await. So enhanced method of promise, right? So far we have used the await keyword only inside the async method. So it is a rule. So await has to be used only inside an async keyword, right? But now with this introduction of top level await, so it is not mandate that await has to be inside an async when we are exporting the module. So this we can use this top level await in the modules. So when you are exporting the modules, we can make use of this await keyword without using the async function. So and then we have private properties like inside a class. So ES6 introduced the class concepts for JavaScript, right? So far we had only the public methods and public properties for a class. So now with this, they introduced something called private methods and private properties for the class. And we have the new array method, like we have built-in array methods, mini array methods. Now another addition to this array method is at to get that particular value at that specified index position. Okay. So normally we used to get that array elements with its index position itself. Like for example, when we have 10 arrays, if I want to get the second element, we used to specify array at the index square bracket of 2, which we used to specify. In case assume that if I want to get the last value of an array, which we don't know like what is the length of the array. So normally what we do is like array of array dot length -1. So instead of arrays, so we'll do slice of -1 of 0. Now what we can do is array dot at -1. So automatically it is going to provide the last element of an array. And again it is supported across all the browsers. And then top level await. So when async await was first introduced, attempting to use an await outside an async function resulted in syntax error. We cannot use await outside of the async function. So top level await enables the developer to use the await keyword outside of the async function. For example, in older behavior, so if you want to use await, so we need to wrap it inside a async and we used to make a immediate invoking function. Whereas in the new behavior, just straight away we can able to make use of the await without the async keyword in the module level. And again, for example, if you want to download a CDN, so what we can do, like for example, instead of using async, straight away I can use, like for example, if the CDN A was available, it is going to take the CDN A. If not, then it is going to take the CDN B. Okay. Some class public properties and public methods. So normally for the class, so we have a properties and we have a method. So normally we use to access the properties like that object instance, that property name and method name we use to access, right? So this is the normal behavior. So now when we have a private properties, so class fields are public by default. If you're not specifying anything, by default it is public, but private class members can be created by using the as prefix, as C# or sharp, we can say it is. The privacy encapsulation of this class feature is enclosed by JavaScript itself. The private members are native to the language. Before this, syntax existed. Okay. So how they are making the properties and methods as private is by adding a hash before your property name or method name. So in this case, like for example, all the properties I made it as like private properties. So we cannot straight away access that properties with that object. Only through the public inside this method, for example, inside this full name method, I could able to access the a first name and last name, and it is not a private method. So with that instance of that media object, I could able to access the full name. So and then if you want to get other private variables, so as usual, like we can use a getter and setter method. So we can able to set a get and set for it, and we can able to use a getter and setter. So this is the high-level features I covered. So apart from this, as I said, there is something called media session, and they introduced more on the CSS coloring properties, like we have color mix, relative color. They are given more importance on the coloring part of that CSS, and then we have something called eyedropper API, which is used to fetch that particular color. It's similar to color picker, which can be used outside the browser as well. And then we have something called like in the navigator object, like so we might have heard about cookies, right? So which is used to fetch store the data locally, and they introduce something called chips. So it is again a subset of cookies. So what happens is, like for example, your chat application which runs on both web application A and B. So we have a cookies for the chat server. So it is common to both A and B. So but if I want to set the cookies only for the specific application called A or B, so we can set some property called chips. So it is able to access the cookie property only for that particular domain, even though it is attached to the multiple domains, but it is specific to only that to secure the data. So I will run through the examples. So for the dialog element, so we are using the HTML native element called dialog element. So whichever data which we are going to specify inside the dialog element, it is not going to display by default. So here I have a method button called update details. On click of this button, so we are displaying this element called update details. So here I'm doing the operations like I'm getting the element called update button and getting the element called dialog element, and I'm going to display the data in the output box. So I'm displaying the dialog using a method called show model. The show model is the built-in property for this dialog element. So let me run this. So now I'm clicking up this button. So like the model, so we can able to style this model. So again, it's an HTML data we are going to style. We can style according to our need. So I'm just going to select some of this data. So and again, it has accessibility features. Now if I click escape, automatically this will get cancelled. Again, we can able to control it. So if you think that on escape, if you want to close this or not, we can able to control it. So next we have something called lazy loading. So now I just designed a small web page kind of thing. So we have, for example, I'm just going to my display my images. So I have 100 images displayed over here. For all the images, like what I did is I specified loading colon lazy. So now what happens? Let's see. So even though I have specified, so it has loaded all the 100 images on one go. Even though I have specified the attribute called loading equals lazy, but still it downloaded all the 100 images that I go. So here what is happening is like even though we have specified loading equals lazy, so it is important to specify the height and width for the images. So here, if you see here, I have selected the image tag and I applied the height and width. Why this height and width is important is, image should include the dimension attribute. While the browser loads an image, it doesn't immediately know the image dimension unless because it doesn't know like what is the dimension of the image. So what is the space it is going to take to, because whether how this lazy loading works is whatever the image needs to be displayed on that particular viewport, it is loading that particular images. So which is behind that viewport, it is not loading that image. So it needs to know the what is the dimension of the image which needs to display in that particular viewport, right? So it is very important to specify the height and width for the images if you want to make this image lazy loading to work. Okay. So now I have specified height and width for this. Now if you see here, if it is without lazy loading, it takes like 350 milliseconds to load this data. So like it now here it has loaded only the few images like which is need to display in this particular viewport. So on scroll on demand, whenever I'm scrolling, so it is going to load that particular images. Now I have loaded up to this particular level. So it was loaded only those particular images. So unnecessarily I am not fetching the data from the server. So it is reducing our bandwidth, server's bandwidth as well. And also our page loads very fast. It improves the performance as well. So as I said, for the private properties, we can able to set the getter and setter, and we could be able to specify the hash keyword by specifying the meaning it as like private properties. Okay. And so these are the resources which I referred to. So you can, all this data is available on the web.dev, and in google.io's data also it is like what's new for the paid platform. So we have all the description, detailed description on it as well. Yeah. Any questions so far? Yeah.
What about the security improvements? There are ways to secure a server, there are ways to secure a web on the server side, but even now people are like using HTML, injecting HTML, injecting SQL. Is there any possibility to secure the web in UI level?
Yeah, since like the security level when it comes to security, like it basically like we can able to like for example we can avoid, for example when we are using the input element, we can able to avoid like injecting the element itself. So in that we can able, even if the user is, because normally they inject the script, right? So normally what we do, one level of controlling is like even though if they introducing the element, so what we can do is we can trim that element and we can able to only take that data. So that is one of the main way of injecting the data through the scripts. So in all the input elements, like we can do that filtering process to avoid. Again, I agree that there are many ways to do that, but it is like a basic level to filter out.
As you told, there is a new thing for cookies, right?
Yeah, cookies like chips.
Yeah, even the main use of cookies is to if someone is using a chat window in one screen and they should not duplicate it or use it simultaneously.
Yeah, even it's not duplicate. For example, the same chat application might be used in another web domain. Yeah.
On in the,
Yeah. To avoid that, they introduce the concept called chips.
but this is like this will increase the security issues.
I guess it will decrease the security issue. For example, let's say in the chat application, you are going to share your credentials, like for example, your username, password to that particular domain. So that same data can, because since it's the same chat server, it can be applicable to the another domain as well. So it is now available because you already accepted the cookies to access your data, right? The same domain B can able to access the data which you provided it for the domain A. So now by setting this cookie, so it is applicable only to chip, it is applicable only to the domain A. It cannot able to read the data in the domain B.
Okay. But how like what some those technologies use these cookies are like if I open a new tab with the same chat, it will use the cookies to confirm that you are using it in both tabs. You want to switch tab or something.
Yeah, right.
So by using this
Chips, we can able to overwrite it. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, then thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you, everyone.
A very big hi to everyone over here. Now today we are going to give a talk on Firebase, the structure of data, the way it's stored, and how it's retrieved and connected with users. So next, I'm Meenadshi and she's Anitha. We are actually college students in Savita Engineering College. We are doing our second year BCSE over there. Now today we are going to look into first an introduction to Firebase. Even though Varun, the Firebase expert over here, he already gave a brief intro about what it is. I'd also like to give a short intro on Firebase too. Next, we'll be looking at how data is being stored, and then how data is retrieved in Firebase, and then how Firebase user data relationships are over there. For the introduction, Firebase is actually an app development platform on Google Cloud Platform. It actually started up as a YC11 startup where in 2011. Next, in 2014, it was actually taken over by Google. And then Google actually developed it into a next generation app development platform where it is actually being used as a backend as a service. Initially, it was actually an online chat service provider for websites. And then it's actually a real-time database which can connect to multiple devices at the same time, and it uses NoSQL as its database. And Anitha, the previous one. Okay, traditionally, we'll actually code both the front end and the back end to actually make an app, but it actually involves a lot of hard work to do the back end part. And there are a lot of front end developers here, I guess, and y'all will find back end to be very difficult. Well, Firebase will make it more easier for y'all. And then there are key integrations in Firebase. You can integrate with various apps. And those apps are as follows, like Google Ads, AdMob, BigQuery, Google Play, and Code's Data Studio and Slack. Next up, we have companies using Firebase as follows. Some companies that we may know are Alibaba, the Accenture, and then the New York Times. And we have the Economist, Trivago, and so on. So now let's move on to how data is being stored. Anitha will be taking over right now.
Okay, let's get into how data is getting stored in the Firebase. And like you see that in SQL you'll be writing so much of codes, and while dealing with the SQL databases, you'll be having so much of tables, so much of complex records and all. So in Firebase is very simple. It's a real-time database, and the structure of the data is simply a JSON tree. And you can just see here, you'll be having so many objects like users and all and stuff like that. you can also just create the attributes by just clicking on the respective object. And this is how the structure of the Firebase database would be. And then there are so many ways to do it. And the first one is we need to avoid so much of nesting, because while we are just nesting the databases so much, it will be very complex to just access a certain object, right? But if we are accessing the respective thing, like you can access. So next will be cool. And then it's nothing but database, which is a cloud-hosted JSON tree. And then, yeah, that is the existing tree, which is a it has a JSON structure. And then we can also have keys like auto-generated Firebase and all. And then we can also use our own keys like user IDs or semantic names also. And in the JSON attribute, you are not permitted to use ASCII characters as well. And then we can also create our own key, like we have seen in the previous slide. It is like a UTF-8 encoder, and as I said right now, the ASCII control characters are also not allowed here, and the size is maximum of 68 bytes. Yeah. And how the data is gonna be retrieved to be carried over by Meenadshi.
Okay, so there are two ways of being data retrieved in Firebase. The first one is the one-time call to get value async of function. And then the next one would be attaching an event on a Fire database reference. So an event listener is actually called once for the initial state of the data, and then again it will be called when the data changes. Okay, so first we'll have to get the database reference in order to access the data. For that, you can see the last line over here. It's a database reference. You're actually calling an object and you're getting the instance over there. Next one. Okay, first, for reading the data, you'll actually be using the get values async of function, as I told you at first itself. What it will do actually is, it will return a static snapshot of the data itself as a screenshot to us back. So if there's a data in that particular path, you'll actually get back the result as a snapshot. If there's no data, you'll get a result of null. Next, we can use these event listener handlers over there, which are value changed, child added, child changed, child removed, and child moved. So value changed, you actually get to read and listen for changes in the entire contents of path. So it will actually be used each and every time a change is being made in the Firebase database. And then the child added, child changed, and child removed event listeners will actually be used all together. They'll come together. And then the child added listener will actually be used when a child is being added. And then the child changed will come after child added. And then child removed will also be followed. The child move function will actually usually come after the child move function, and then next. Okay. Now Anitha will be taking over right now.
So for retrieving the data from the Firebase database, here we can retrieve the data by key values and sort of stuff, and we can also filter. Like if you want to retrieve the data, you'll also expect it to be sorted, and it is also to be filtered, right? So to just sort the results in the database, we are using three methods, which is nothing but order by method. And first one is order by child, second one is order by event, and order by key. So we have these three methods through which we can sort it out the results of the database, and then we are having. We don't have to use, actually we are not permitted to use three methods at the same time. We can only use one method simultaneously, and then like when it is going to be, when you just see here, we are using the order by child method here. And the element is the score. So we are sorting it out by using the score values of the data. And then we are going to the filter. In filters, we have limit to first, limit to last, start at, end at. By range values also we can sort it out or filter it out. And here we are using limit to last, which is nothing but we are limiting the maximum values from the last row of the database. And then your user data relationships will be carried over by Meenadshi.
So now we'll be looking at Firebase user data relationships. There are actually 3 ways in which user data are being related to each other in Firebase. The first one would be user query. Well, the data will get nested under the user ID. So over here, we can see that item ID is actually being nested under user ID over here. Next one. So this is an example of how the item ID is being actually nested under user ID. Next. Okay, the second way of how we can actually connect is item query. So in this, the user ID will be actually on the items. So we can see that the item ID over here has the user ID as a member in it itself. Next one. So we have an example over here of how the user ID is actually being under item ID. Next is that we can use membership to actually show multiple user relationships in the Firebase data. So under item ID, we have members, under which we can use 2 users and actually connect them with the data over there. So this is a small example of how the user data is actually users being connected with the data using multiple relationships. So that was all for our presentation. We hope you got to know more about Firebase and how the data is being stored over there. And thank you very much for actually listening to what we said. Thanks a lot.